Ryan Mitchell looked me dead in the eye and said I was overqualified for a position I helped create 4 years ago. He suggested I try applying somewhere that could handle my extensive experience. What Ryan didn't realize was that his biggest client nightmare for the past 2 years had been sitting right across from him the entire time, and I was about to make his quarterly projections look like a bad joke. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Maya Chen, and this is the story of how one job interview cost a company their entire mid-market division and gave me the satisfaction of watching my former boss realize he'd been competing against a ghost he helped create. The morning started like any other Thursday in Austin. I grabbed my usual coffee from Grind and Brew Cafe, the little place on East 6th that knows my order before I walk through the door. Extra shot, oat milk, no sugar. I needed the caffeine because today wasn't just any day. Today I was walking back into StreamlineCore Technologies for the first time since they escorted me out with a cardboard box and a handshake that felt more like a dismissal than a farewell. 4 years ago, I was senior product manager at StreamlineCore, working on marketing automation software that was supposed to revolutionize how businesses handle customer engagement. I loved that job. I mean, genuinely loved it. I'd stay late debugging user experience issues, spend weekends researching market trends, and pitch new features with the enthusiasm of someone who actually believed we were building something meaningful. But office politics are a different kind of battlefield, and I learned the hard way that passion doesn't protect you from corporate restructuring when someone decides you're a threat. Ryan Mitchell was the vice president of strategic development back then, and he had this way of making you feel small during meetings without ever raising his voice. He'd listen to your ideas with this patient smile, nod thoughtfully, then explain why your approach needed refinement. Always refinement, never implementation. When the layoffs came during that brutal quarter where 3 major enterprise clients pulled their contracts, Ryan delivered the news personally. He sat across from me in Conference Room B, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Austin, and explained that my position was being eliminated as part of a strategic realignment. Strategic realignment. Corporate speak for "we don't want you here anymore, but we can't say that." He handed me the severance paperwork and said something I'll never forget. "Maya, you're incredibly talented, but sometimes being overqualified can work against you in a corporate environment. Maybe this is an opportunity to find somewhere that truly appreciates your skill set." The words stung because they felt both like a compliment and an insult wrapped in the same sentence. Overqualified. As if my experience was somehow a liability rather than an asset. The months that followed were rough. I applied to dozens of positions, went through countless interviews, and kept hearing variations of the same feedback. "You're impressive, but we're looking for someone who can grow with the role. You might get bored here. Are you sure you wouldn't be happier somewhere more challenging?" It was like being told you're too good for every job you actually wanted, while simultaneously being told you weren't good enough for the ones you could settle for. But here's what happens when you're forced to step outside your comfort zone. You start seeing opportunities that were invisible when you were comfortable. During those long months of job searching, I kept noticing something that StreamlineCore and all their competitors were missing. They were so focused on landing massive enterprise contracts worth millions of dollars that they completely ignored the growing market of small to medium-sized businesses who desperately needed marketing automation but couldn't afford enterprise-level solutions. These smaller companies were trying to compete with major corporations using spreadsheets and prayer. They needed the same sophisticated tools that Fortune 500 companies used, but at a price point that made sense for their budgets, and with interfaces simple enough that they didn't need a team of specialists to operate them. StreamlineCore's cheapest package started at $15,000 annually, with implementation costs that could easily double that figure. For a company doing $2 million in revenue, that's not a business expense. That's a fantasy. So I started freelancing, initially just to pay rent while I continued job hunting. I'd help small businesses set up basic automation sequences, design email campaigns, optimize their customer journey mapping. Word spread quickly in Austin's tight-knit business community. One satisfied client would recommend me to 3 others, and suddenly I had more work than I could handle from my apartment. 6 months into freelancing, I realized I wasn't looking for jobs anymore. I was building something. I registered NextBridge Innovations as an LLC, rented a small converted warehouse space in East Austin that used to house a vintage clothing store, and started developing what would become the most user-friendly marketing automation platform for small and medium businesses in Texas. The first year was brutal. I was coding during the day, handling client calls in the evening, and learning business operations at night. I taught myself advanced programming languages through YouTube tutorials and online courses, something I'd wanted to do since college but never had time for while climbing the corporate ladder. I designed every interface with one principle in mind. If a small business owner couldn't figure it out in 10 minutes without reading a manual, it needed to be simpler. By year 2, NextBridge had 12 clients and was generating enough revenue for me to hire my first employee, a brilliant developer named Carlos, who'd been laid off from a startup that burned through venture capital faster than they could acquire users. By year 3, we had 38 clients and had expanded beyond Austin to serve businesses across Texas and into Oklahoma. We weren't trying to compete with StreamlineCore's enterprise clients. We were serving the market they considered too small to bother with. And here's the beautiful irony. Several of our clients were companies that had grown beyond our target market and needed more sophisticated solutions.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Instead of upgrading with us, they'd approach companies like StreamlineCore for enterprise-level service. But when they called StreamlineCore, they'd mention that they'd been successfully using NextBridge's platform and wanted something similar but more robust. StreamlineCore would then have to reverse engineer our user experience design and feature set to meet these clients' expectations. We were essentially training StreamlineCore's future clients to expect a level of simplicity and user-friendliness that StreamlineCore had never prioritized. They found themselves constantly defending why their platform was so much more complicated to use, why implementation took 6 months instead of 6 weeks, why their reporting dashboards required training sessions when clients had been used to intuitive interfaces they could navigate immediately. But I kept NextBridge deliberately low profile. No flashy marketing campaigns, no industry conference booths, no press releases about our growth. I wanted to build sustainably and quietly. Most of our new business came from referrals, and I liked it that way. There's something powerful about being the solution that people discover organically, rather than the one that gets shoved in their faces through advertising. Then last month, I saw something that made me laugh out loud in my office. StreamlineCore had posted a job opening for Senior Product Strategy Consultant, and the job description was essentially everything I'd been doing for the past 4 years. They wanted someone who could help them develop solutions for the small to medium business market, someone who understood user experience design for non-technical users, someone who could bridge the gap between enterprise functionality and accessible implementation. They were hiring someone to solve the exact problem I'd been solving successfully for 4 years. The problem they could have avoided entirely if they'd listened to my proposals back when I was sitting in their meetings, explaining why we needed to develop products for smaller businesses instead of only chasing whale-sized enterprise contracts. I stared at that job posting for a full 10 minutes, reading through requirements that perfectly matched my skill set and experience. Part of me was curious. Had StreamlineCore changed? Had Ryan learned from the mistakes that cost them market share? Was this an opportunity to rejoin a company that now understood the vision I'd been trying to communicate years ago? But there was another part of me, a more mischievous part, that wanted to see exactly how much they'd learned. Or more accurately, how much they hadn't learned. So I applied. Not as Maya Chen, founder and CEO of NextBridge Innovations, but as Maya Chen, freelance marketing consultant who'd been working with small businesses for the past 4 years. I crafted a resume that highlighted all my relevant experience without mentioning my company by name. I listed myself as an independent consultant who specialized in marketing automation for small to medium-sized businesses, which was technically accurate even if it was dramatically understated. I wanted to see if they'd recognize the value they'd thrown away. I wanted to test whether their hiring process had improved since the days when they dismissed talent for being overqualified. And honestly, I wanted to satisfy my curiosity about whether Ryan Mitchell had evolved as a leader, or if he was still the same person who thought experience was somehow a disqualification rather than an asset. The interview was scheduled for 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. I drove downtown to the Meridian Tower, the same gleaming high-rise, where I'd spent 3 years of my career believing I was building something important. The lobby looked exactly the same. Polished marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, and that particular smell of expensive air freshening systems mixed with corporate ambition. Lisa Wang was still working the reception desk, though she didn't recognize me when I checked in. That wasn't surprising. 4 years changes people, and I'd gained confidence in ways that probably altered how I carried myself. When I worked at StreamlineCore, I was always trying to prove I belonged. Now I knew I belonged anywhere I chose to be. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me a few minutes to center myself and remember why I was there. This wasn't about getting a job. I didn't need their job. This was about understanding how much StreamlineCore had learned from their mistakes, and whether they were ready to acknowledge that their approach to the market had been short-sighted. When the elevator doors opened, I walked past the same reception area where I used to bring clients for meetings, past the conference rooms where I'd pitched ideas that were dismissed as too ambitious or too focused on small-scale implementations. Everything looked exactly the same, which told me something important about how much the company had actually changed. Ryan Mitchell appeared right on schedule, looking exactly like someone who'd spent 4 years climbing the corporate ladder without questioning whether he was climbing towards something worthwhile. Same expensive suit that fit just slightly too perfectly, same confident stride that suggested he owned every room he entered, same smile that managed to be warm and condescending simultaneously. When he saw me, his expression went through a fascinating sequence of emotions. First confusion, as if he couldn't quite place where he knew me from. Then recognition, accompanied by the kind of surprise that suggested he genuinely hadn't expected to see me again. Finally, that practiced professional mask that corporate executives wear when they need to navigate unexpected situations without showing vulnerability. "Maya," he said, extending his hand for a shake that felt exactly as insincere as it had 4 years ago. "This is unexpected. You're here for the consultant position." He checked his tablet, probably confirming that my name was actually on his interview schedule, and this wasn't some kind of elaborate mistake. The interview panel was waiting in Conference Room C, the smaller one without the intimidating city view. Ryan had brought Jessica Torres from Human Resources, a woman I remembered as someone who nodded a lot during meetings but rarely contributed meaningful input. The third person was Kevin Park, a junior executive I didn't recognize who had the eager energy of someone trying to impress his superiors by asking insightful questions. They started with the standard interview questions that every corporate professional has memorized responses for. "Tell us about your experience. What interests you about this position? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Describe a challenging project you've managed." I answered everything honestly, focusing on my work with small businesses and the marketing automation solutions I'd developed, without mentioning that I owned the company that had been systematically winning clients in their target market. But I could sense something underneath the polite professionalism. Ryan kept glancing at his watch, not in an obvious way, but enough that I noticed. Jessica was taking notes that seemed more like doodles, writing things down without really listening to my responses. Kevin asked questions that suggested he'd read my resume but hadn't understood the implications of my experience. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Ryan leaned back in his chair, adopting that patient expression I remembered so well, and delivered the line that had brought me here. "Maya, I have to be honest with you. Looking at your background, you seem significantly overqualified for this position. This role is designed for someone who can grow into strategic thinking, not someone who's already operating at that level. We're concerned that you might become frustrated with the scope of the work or find yourself unchallenged by the day-to-day responsibilities." Jessica nodded along, adding her own perspective. "We're looking for someone hungry, someone who sees this as an opportunity to develop their strategic thinking, rather than someone who might view it as a step backward. Your experience with small business consulting is impressive, but this position requires understanding enterprise-level complexity." Kevin decided this was his moment to contribute something memorable. "Have you considered positions at smaller firms where your experience might be more appropriately matched? Sometimes the best opportunities come from environments that can fully utilize your existing skill set, rather than asking you to scale back to fit a predefined role." There it was. The same dismissal I'd received 4 years ago, delivered with the same combination of compliments and condescension. They were telling me I was too experienced for a job I'd essentially been doing successfully for years, while simultaneously suggesting I didn't understand the complexity of work I'd been pioneering in their industry. I sat there for a moment, letting their words settle, feeling that familiar sting of being told you're simultaneously too much and not enough. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't a desperate ex-employee hoping for validation. This time, I was something they hadn't anticipated. "Interesting perspective," I said finally, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Can I ask you something about your small to medium business market strategy? Because I've been following StreamlineCore's growth, and it seems like you've been losing ground in that segment over the past couple of years. Ryan's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in his professional composure. Our focus has always been enterprise-level clients. That's where the real value is in this industry. Right, I continued. But you've lost several mid-market accounts recently, haven't you? Companies like Austin Tech Solutions, Lone Star Marketing Group, and Hill Country Manufacturing. They were all clients who started small and grew with their marketing automation partner before moving to enterprise-level service. Now I had their attention. Jessica stopped pretending to take notes. Kevin looked genuinely confused about how I knew specific details about their client portfolio. Ryan was staring at me with the kind of focus that suggested he was rapidly recalculating his assumptions about this conversation. How do you know about our client retention metrics? Ryan asked, his voice carrying a note of suspicion that hadn't been there before. Well, I said, reaching into my bag and pulling out my phone. That's where this gets interesting. You see, I haven't just been freelancing for the past 4 years. I've been building something that directly addresses the market gap you've been ignoring. I opened the NextBridge Innovations website on my phone and turned the screen toward them. Those companies I mentioned: Austin Tech Solutions, Lone Star Marketing Group, Hill Country Manufacturing. They didn't just leave StreamlineCore, they came to me. They came to NextBridge because I could offer them something you couldn't. Sophisticated marketing automation at a price point that made sense for their business model, with implementation that took weeks instead of months, and interfaces they could actually use without hiring specialists. The room went completely silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming, could hear the distant sound of traffic 15 floors below, could practically hear the gears turning in their heads as they processed what I'd just told them. NextBridge Innovations, Jessica whispered, clearly recognizing the name. That's you? That's me. Founded it with the severance check StreamlineCore gave me, actually. Funny how that worked out. Kevin looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Ryan's face had gone through several color changes, finally settling on a shade that suggested he was rapidly calculating the financial implications of what he'd just learned. We had no idea, Kevin stammered. Your resume didn't mention owning a company. Of course it didn't. See, I was curious about whether StreamlineCore had learned anything from the market changes over the past 4 years. Whether you'd recognize that dismissing people for being overqualified might not be the best strategy when those people go on to build solutions that directly compete with your business model. I stood up, straightening my jacket and gathering my things. Ryan, you told me 4 years ago that being overqualified could work against me in a corporate environment. You suggested I find somewhere that truly appreciated my skill set. Well, I did. I found it by creating it myself. Now about this position you're trying to fill. You're right about one thing. I am overqualified, but not because I have too much experience for the role. I'm overqualified because I've been doing this job successfully for 4 years, while you've been trying to figure out why your mid-market strategy isn't working. Ryan found his voice. Maya, obviously we didn't have complete information about your achievements. Perhaps we should discuss a different kind of opportunity. Senior level, maybe department head. We could certainly explore executive compensation packages. Jessica jumped in quickly. I think we need to schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss how your experience might fit into our strategic planning at a much higher level. Kevin nodded enthusiastically. With equity options and a significant signing bonus to make up for any misunderstanding about the scope of this opportunity. I smiled, not the bitter smile of someone seeking revenge, but something warmer. Something that came from a place of genuine satisfaction. Here's the thing. 4 years ago, I would have been grateful for any offer you made. I would have seen it as validation that I belonged in your world. But I don't need validation from your world anymore. I built my own world, and it's working quite well. However, I am interested in a different conversation. Not about me joining StreamlineCore, but about whether StreamlineCore might be interested in partnering with NextBridge. We could discuss a licensing agreement for our user interface design, or perhaps a referral relationship for clients who grow beyond our target market and need enterprise-level solutions. The silence stretched long enough that I could see them processing the complete reversal of power dynamics that had just occurred. Maya, Ryan said carefully. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that instead of trying to hire someone to solve a problem I've already solved, you consider working with the person who solved it. NextBridge has 52 clients now, with a growth rate that's consistently exceeded projections for 3 consecutive years. We're on track to break $4 million in revenue this year. Several of our clients have expressed interest in graduating to enterprise-level solutions, but they want to work with companies that understand their user experience expectations. I left my business card on the table, the one with CEO, NextBridge Innovations printed in clean professional lettering, and walked toward the door. Jessica called after me. What happens now? Now you decide whether you want to continue losing market share to competitors you didn't know existed, or whether you want to explore how we might work together to serve clients more effectively. My office number is on the card. You have 2 weeks to consider whether partnership makes more sense than competition. 6 months later, StreamlineCore and NextBridge signed a strategic partnership agreement worth $1.2 million annually. They refer clients who need enterprise-level solutions after growing with our platform, and we refer small businesses who are ready to graduate to their more complex systems. Ryan kept his position, and actually turned out to be quite effective at managing partnership relationships when he wasn't busy being dismissive. Jessica now handles our joint client transitions and has become one of my most reliable professional contacts. Kevin left StreamlineCore 3 months after our interview to join a startup, but he sent me a LinkedIn message saying our conversation had inspired him to take more risks in his career. The real victory wasn't the partnership deal or the revenue increase or even the satisfaction of watching their quarterly reports show improved client retention. The real victory was walking into that interview, knowing I didn't need their approval anymore. Sometimes being called overqualified is just another way of saying the people evaluating you aren't qualified to recognize what you're offering. Today, NextBridge employs 18 people, including 3 former StreamlineCore employees who reached out after hearing about our partnership. We're expanding into Oklahoma and New Mexico, and I'm speaking at the Austin Business Development Conference next month about sustainable growth strategies for mid-market companies. As for being overqualified, I'm still figuring out what that actually means, but I know it's not a limitation. It's just a signal that you're in the wrong room with the wrong people asking the wrong questions. The right room is usually the one you build yourself. The decision to start my own company wasn't born from some grand entrepreneurial vision or a burning desire to disrupt an industry. It happened on a Tuesday morning in February, when I was sitting in my kitchen, laptop open to yet another job rejection email, wondering if I was fundamentally unemployable, or if the entire corporate world had collectively decided that experience was somehow a character flaw. The email was from TechSphere Dynamics, a mid-tier marketing software company where I'd interviewed for a product development manager position. The role was practically identical to what I'd been doing at StreamlineCore, just with a smaller budget and less sophisticated infrastructure. Perfect, I thought. A step down that might finally be seen as appropriately matched to my qualifications, but their feedback was crushingly familiar. While we were impressed with your extensive background, we feel you might be overqualified for this position and concerned you wouldn't find the work challenging enough to stay long-term. I closed the laptop and walked to my window, staring out at the construction crew working on the apartment complex across the street. These guys showed up every morning at 7, worked until the sun went down, and were building something real. Something you could point to and say, I made that. I envied them. In the corporate world, success was measured in quarterly reports and PowerPoint presentations that would be forgotten within months. These construction workers were creating something that would shelter families for decades. That's when it hit me. I'd been approaching this all wrong. Instead of trying to convince other people that my experience was valuable, I should be using that experience to create value directly. The market gap I'd identified at StreamlineCore wasn't going away just because I was unemployed. Small and medium-sized businesses still needed sophisticated marketing automation tools. They still couldn't afford enterprise-level solutions. They were still trying to compete with major corporations using outdated systems and manual processes. I spent the rest of that day researching business formation requirements in Texas. By Thursday, I'd registered NextBridge Innovations as a limited liability company. The name came from a conversation I'd had with a potential client during my freelancing work. She'd said she needed someone who could build a bridge between where her company was and where it needed to be. But that most consultants either talked down to her like she was running a lemonade stand, or pitched solutions so complex they'd need to hire an entire IT department to implement them. She needed someone who could bridge that gap, someone who understood both sides. The first month was terrifying. I'd never run a business before. I understood product development, user experience design, and strategic planning, but I knew nothing about tax obligations, business insurance, client contracts, or the 1,000 other details that separate successful entrepreneurs from people with expensive hobbies. I bought a stack of business development books from the local bookstore and read them cover to cover, taking notes like I was studying for the most important exam of my life.
My first real client was Elena Rodriguez, who owned a boutique marketing agency that specialized in restaurants and hospitality businesses. She'd built a solid reputation in Austin's food scene, but she was losing potential clients to larger agencies because she couldn't offer the automated email marketing and customer segmentation tools that restaurants needed to stay competitive. Her current system involved manually updating spreadsheets and sending batch emails through a basic service that made everything look generic and unprofessional. Elena found me through a mutual connection at a Chamber of Commerce networking event. She explained her situation over coffee at Grind
and Brew, the same cafe where I'd been spending most of my mornings working on business planning. She needed something more sophisticated than the basic email services but couldn't justify the $15,000 annual cost of enterprise platforms for a business that served clients with tight margins. I spent 2 weeks developing a customized solution for her agency. Instead of trying to adapt an existing platform, I built something from scratch that specifically addressed the needs of restaurants and hospitality businesses. The system could track customer dining patterns, send automated follow-up messages based on visit frequency, segment customers based on spending habits and dietary preferences, and generate reports that helped restaurant owners understand their customer base in ways they'd never had access to before. The implementation took 3 days instead of the 3 months that enterprise solutions typically required. Elena's team could use the system immediately without extensive training. Within 6 weeks, her clients were seeing measurable improvements in customer retention and repeat visit rates. Word spread quickly through Austin's restaurant community. Suddenly, I had more inquiries than I could handle, but success brought new challenges. Each client wanted customization specific to their industry. A dental practice needed different automation triggers than a fitness studio. A legal firm required different compliance features than a retail store. I was essentially building a new system for every client, which made the work incredibly time-intensive and difficult to scale. That's when I made the decision that would define NextBridge's future direction. Instead of continuing to build custom solutions for each client, I would develop a core platform flexible enough to adapt to different industries while maintaining the simplicity and affordability that made it attractive to small businesses. The challenge was creating something sophisticated enough to handle complex automation needs while remaining intuitive enough that busy business owners could implement it themselves. I spent 4 months in what I now think of as the development cave. I'd work from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, breaking only for meals and the occasional walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. I was learning advanced programming languages through online tutorials, teaching myself database architecture, and designing user interfaces that could make complex functionality feel simple. There were days when I questioned whether I was attempting something beyond my capabilities, but the alternative was going back to job interviews where my experience was treated like a liability. The breakthrough came when I stopped thinking about marketing automation as a technical challenge and started approaching it as a communication problem. Businesses didn't need more features. They needed better ways to connect with their customers in meaningful, personalized ways that felt authentic rather than robotic. The most sophisticated automation in the world was worthless if it made businesses sound like they were being run by algorithms rather than people. I designed the core platform around conversation flows instead of technical parameters. Users could map out customer journeys the same way they'd plan a conversation with a friend. If someone visited your website but didn't make a purchase, what would you want to say to them? If a customer hadn't been in touch for 3 months, how would you reach out without seeming pushy? If someone made their first purchase, what kind of follow-up would make them feel valued rather than pestered? The technical complexity was hidden behind interfaces that felt natural and intuitive. Business owners could create sophisticated automation sequences without ever seeing code or dealing with technical jargon. The system would handle the complicated parts automatically while giving users complete control over the messaging and timing that really mattered for their customer relationships. By the end of my first year, NextBridge had 12 clients and was generating enough revenue for me to rent the converted warehouse space in East Austin that would become our first real office. The space was perfect. High ceilings, good natural light, exposed brick walls that gave it character without feeling pretentious. It had previously housed a vintage clothing store that specialized in 1980s and 1990s fashion, and you could still find the occasional sequin or button that had been missed during the cleanup. I liked the reminder that this space had been used by someone else who was building something creative and unconventional. The warehouse also gave me room to hire my first employee. Carlos Mendoza was a software developer who'd been laid off from a fintech startup that had burned through their venture capital funding faster than they could acquire paying customers. He was brilliant at back-end development but had grown frustrated with the startup world's obsession with raising money instead of building sustainable businesses. When I offered him a position at NextBridge, I was honest about our size and our limitations. We weren't going to make anyone rich quickly, but we were building something real for customers who genuinely needed what we were creating. Carlos turned out to be exactly what NextBridge needed. He could handle the technical infrastructure that allowed our platform to scale while I focused on client relationships and product development. More importantly, he understood the philosophy behind what we were building. He'd worked at companies that prioritized impressive features over user experience, and he'd seen how that approach created products that looked good in demonstrations but frustrated people in real-world use. Together we rebuilt the core platform to handle the increased demand we were seeing. Instead of building custom solutions for each client, we developed a modular system that could be configured for different industries while maintaining consistency in user experience. A restaurant could have automated reservation confirmations and birthday promotions. A fitness studio could have class reminder sequences and membership renewal campaigns. A retail store could have inventory notifications and seasonal sales campaigns. But they all used the same underlying system, which meant we could support more clients without exponentially increasing our development workload. Year 2 brought validation that our approach was working. We grew from 12 clients to 38 clients, and our revenue increased by 240%. More importantly, our client retention rate was 96%, which meant people weren't just trying our platform out of curiosity. They were finding genuine value and sticking with us as their businesses grew. But the most satisfying validation came from an unexpected source. I started hearing from other marketing automation companies that potential clients were comparing their platforms to NextBridge's user experience. Prospective customers would say things like, "We've been using NextBridge for email marketing, and we love how simple it is to set up campaigns. Can your platform do something similar?" These companies found themselves having to justify why their implementations were more complex, why their reporting was harder to understand, why their customer support required technical knowledge that most small business owners didn't have. Some of these companies tried to dismiss NextBridge as a simplified solution that couldn't handle serious business needs. But their own clients were proving them wrong. Businesses were achieving measurable results with our platform. Customer engagement rates were improving. Sales conversion rates were increasing. Client retention was getting better. The simplicity wasn't a limitation, it was an advantage that allowed business owners to focus on strategy and relationships instead of wrestling with technical complications. By year 3, we had expanded beyond Austin to serve businesses throughout Texas and into neighboring states. Our client base had grown to include companies that had started small and grown into mid-size operations, but they chose to stay with NextBridge because our platform evolved with their needs without becoming unnecessarily complicated. We added features based on client feedback rather than feature checklists that looked impressive in sales presentations. The growth was sustainable and organic. We didn't have venture capital funding or massive marketing budgets. Our new clients came from referrals, word-of-mouth recommendations, and the kind of authentic growth that happens when you solve real problems for real people. I preferred it that way. Too many companies get distracted by pursuing rapid growth funded by investor money, and they lose sight of whether they're actually creating value for their customers. What I didn't anticipate was how our success would start affecting our competitors, particularly the larger companies that had dismissed the small and medium business market as unprofitable. As our client base grew, we were increasingly serving businesses that would eventually outgrow our platform and need enterprise-level solutions. But when these companies contacted enterprise providers, they had expectations that had been shaped by their experience with NextBridge. They expected implementation to take weeks rather than months. They expected interfaces that were intuitive rather than requiring extensive training. They expected customer support that understood their business challenges rather than just technical specifications. They expected pricing that was transparent rather than requiring lengthy negotiations with sales teams. These expectations created pressure on enterprise providers to justify why their solutions were more complicated and expensive. StreamlineCore was feeling this pressure more than most. They had built their reputation on sophisticated functionality for large corporations, but they were losing opportunities with growing businesses that wanted enterprise capabilities delivered with the user experience they'd grown accustomed to with smaller providers. Several potential clients had specifically mentioned NextBridge during their sales conversations, asking why StreamlineCore's platform couldn't be as easy to use or as quick to implement. I became aware of this dynamic through conversations with clients who were exploring enterprise options. They'd mentioned that sales representatives from larger companies seemed defensive when asked about user experience or implementation timelines. Some clients were told that enterprise software was inherently more complex, and that expecting simplicity was unrealistic for serious business applications. These responses didn't inspire confidence. They made it sound like complexity was a feature rather than a problem to be solved. The irony wasn't lost on me. StreamlineCore had dismissed my proposals for developing solutions for smaller businesses, arguing that the market wasn't worth pursuing. Now they were struggling to compete for clients who had grown beyond the small business market because those clients had expectations that StreamlineCore's approach couldn't meet. The market they'd ignored had become a training ground for customer expectations that were reshaping their primary market. But I wasn't interested in gloating or pursuing some kind of competitive revenge. NextBridge was successful because we focused on serving our clients well, not because we were trying to prove a point to former employers. The best competition is simply being better at what you do, not trying to make other people worse at what they do. That philosophy would be tested when I saw StreamlineCore's job posting for a senior product strategy consultant position. The job description read like a blueprint for everything I'd been doing successfully for 4 years. They were looking for someone who could help them develop solutions for the small to medium business market, someone who understood user experience design for non-technical users, someone who could bridge the gap between enterprise functionality and accessible implementation. It was almost flattering in a way. They were hiring someone to solve the exact problem I'd been solving since they laid me off. The question was whether they'd recognize the solution when it was sitting right in front of them, or whether they'd make the same mistake twice by treating experience as a disqualification rather than an asset. I decided to find out. The decision to apply for the StreamlineCore position wasn't made in a moment of clarity or strategic brilliance. It happened on a Friday evening when I was reviewing our quarterly performance reports and realized that NextBridge had reached a milestone I hadn't expected to achieve for another 2 years. We were serving 52 clients across 4 states. Our revenue was approaching $4 million annually, and our client retention rate had actually improved as we'd grown larger. Every metric indicated that we were not just surviving but thriving in ways that validated every choice I'd made since leaving the corporate world. But success, I was discovering, brought its own form of restlessness. The daily challenges that had once consumed all my energy were becoming routine. Carlos could handle most of the technical development independently. Our small team had developed efficient systems for onboarding new clients and managing ongoing relationships. The business was running smoothly enough that I found myself with time to think about bigger questions, including some I'd been avoiding for years. One of those questions was whether I'd proven whatever I needed to prove, or if I was still carrying around unfinished business from my time at StreamlineCore. I told myself that I didn't care what Ryan Mitchell thought about my capabilities, that I'd moved beyond needing validation from people who had failed to recognize my potential. But when I saw that job posting, I felt a familiar stirring of curiosity mixed with something that might have been unresolved frustration. The position they were advertising was essentially a roadmap to solve the problems that had cost them market share over the past 4 years. They wanted someone who could develop strategies for serving small and medium-sized businesses, someone who understood how to make complex technology accessible to non-technical users, someone who could design implementation processes that felt supportive rather than overwhelming. They were looking for someone who could do exactly what I'd been doing successfully since they decided I was unemployable. I spent 3 days reading and rereading that job description, analyzing every requirement and responsibility they'd listed. The more I studied it, the more I realized this wasn't just about hiring someone to fill a gap in their services. This was about acknowledging that their approach to the market had fundamental flaws that needed to be addressed by someone with a completely different perspective. They needed someone who understood that technology should serve businesses, not the other way around. The application process felt surreal. I was crafting a resume that highlighted my relevant experience while deliberately obscuring the full scope of what I'd accomplished. I described myself as a freelance marketing consultant who specialized in automation solutions for small businesses, which was technically accurate but dramatically understated. I included client testimonials and case studies that demonstrated my ability to improve customer engagement and streamline business processes, but I framed everything as individual consulting projects rather than components of a comprehensive platform. I was curious to see whether StreamlineCore's hiring process had evolved since my time there. Would they recognize talent that didn't fit their traditional expectations? Had they learned to value practical experience over corporate pedigree?
Would they be able to see past their preconceptions about what qualified candidates should look like? Or would they make the same mistakes that had cost them competitive advantage in an increasingly important market segment? The email confirming my interview appointment arrived on a Monday morning while I was reviewing development priorities with Carlos. The interview was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2:30 in the afternoon, in Conference Room C at the Meridian Tower. Conference Room C was the smaller meeting space, the one they used for routine interviews rather than important client presentations. The choice felt symbolic, though I wasn't sure if it indicated their assessment of the position's importance or their assessment of my candidacy. I spent the week preparing for the interview the same way I would have prepared for any important business meeting. I researched StreamlineCore's recent performance, analyzed their client portfolio and competitive positioning, and reviewed their marketing materials to understand how they were currently positioning themselves in the market. What I discovered was both fascinating and predictable. StreamlineCore was struggling with exactly the challenges I'd anticipated when I was working there 4 years earlier. Their enterprise focus had served them well during the economic expansion when large corporations were investing heavily in digital transformation initiatives. But as the market matured and competition increased, those same enterprise clients were demanding better user experiences and more flexible implementation options. They were asking why StreamlineCore's platform was so much more difficult to use than the solutions they'd heard about from smaller providers. More telling was what I found in their recent case studies and client testimonials. Several featured clients who had previously worked with other providers before upgrading to StreamlineCore's enterprise solutions. These clients consistently mentioned that they expected certain features and capabilities based on their previous experiences, and they were frustrated when StreamlineCore's implementation process was more complicated and time-consuming than what they'd grown accustomed to with simpler platforms. StreamlineCore was trying to address these concerns by adding user experience designers to their development team and promising faster implementation timelines in their sales materials. But their fundamental approach hadn't changed. They were still designing for technical sophistication first and user accessibility second. They were still treating complexity as evidence of capability rather than recognizing that the best solutions make difficult things appear simple. The morning of the interview, I drove downtown through familiar streets that brought back memories of my previous life in the corporate world. Austin's downtown had continued growing and developing, with new high-rise buildings changing the skyline and increased traffic requiring more patience during the commute. But the energy felt the same. Busy professionals walking quickly between meetings, food trucks serving lunch to office workers who needed to eat at their desks, the particular rhythm of a city that had built its identity around being a place where creative people could build successful businesses. The Meridian Tower still dominated its block, 30 floors of glass and steel that reflected the Texas sky in ways that suggested both ambition and impermanence. I'd spent countless hours in that building, attending meetings and working on projects that had felt important at the time but seemed insignificant in retrospect. Walking back into the lobby felt like returning to a previous version of myself, one that had been more concerned with fitting into existing structures than with building new ones. Lisa Wang was still working the reception desk, though she looked older and more tired than I remembered. The corporate environment tends to wear people down in subtle ways that become visible over time. She was polite but didn't recognize me, which wasn't surprising given how much I'd changed since my StreamlineCore days. When I worked there, I'd carried myself like someone who was constantly trying to prove she belonged. Now I knew I belonged wherever I chose to be, and that confidence probably altered my presence in ways that made me difficult to recognize. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me a few minutes to center myself and remember why I was there. This wasn't about getting a job. I didn't need their job. I had built something better than anything they could offer me. This was about satisfying my curiosity regarding how much StreamlineCore had learned from their mistakes, and whether they were ready to acknowledge that their hiring practices had been short-sighted. When the elevator doors opened, I walked through hallways that looked exactly the same as they had 4 years earlier. Same carpet, same paint colors, same abstract artwork that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. The familiarity was both comforting and unsettling. It suggested that while I had undergone significant personal and professional transformation, StreamlineCore had remained essentially unchanged. Ryan Mitchell appeared at exactly 2:30 punctual in the way that corporate executives use timeliness to demonstrate control and professionalism. He looked like someone who had spent 4 years climbing the corporate ladder without questioning whether the ladder was leaning against the right wall. Same expensive suits that fit perfectly, same confident stride that suggested ownership of every space he entered, same smile that managed to convey warmth and distance simultaneously. When he saw me, his expression went through a rapid sequence of emotions that would have been entertaining if the situation hadn't been so loaded with unresolved history. First confusion, as if he was trying to place where he knew me from. Then recognition, accompanied by surprise that suggested he genuinely hadn't expected our paths to cross again. Finally, that practiced professional mask that corporate executives wear when they need to navigate unexpected situations without showing vulnerability. Maya, he said, extending his hand for a handshake that felt exactly as performative as it had years earlier. This is quite a surprise. You're here for the consultant position. He checked his tablet, probably confirming that my name was actually on his interview schedule, and that this wasn't some elaborate practical joke or administrative error. The interview panel was waiting in conference room C, exactly as specified in my appointment confirmation. Jessica Torres from Human Resources was there, looking like someone who had perfected the art of appearing engaged, while contributing nothing meaningful to conversations. I remembered her as someone who asked questions that sounded thoughtful but revealed that she hadn't really listened to the answers. She had a talent for making people feel heard without actually hearing them. The third panel member was Kevin Park, a junior executive I didn't recognize who had the eager energy of someone trying to impress his superiors by asking insightful questions. He was probably in his late 20s, dressed in a suit that was slightly too expensive for his position, carrying a leather portfolio that looked like it had never been used for actual work. He had the demeanor of someone who had studied business school case studies, but hadn't yet learned that real business problems rarely match the scenarios described in textbooks. They began with the standard interview questions that every corporate professional has rehearsed responses for. Tell us about your background and experience. What interests you about this particular position? Describe your approach to strategic planning and implementation. Walk us through a challenging project you've managed and how you handled obstacles. Where do you see yourself professionally in 5 years? What questions do you have about our company culture and growth opportunities? I answered everything honestly, focusing on my work with small and medium-sized businesses and the automation solutions I'd developed to help them compete more effectively with larger corporations. I talked about the importance of making sophisticated technology accessible to business owners who didn't have technical backgrounds, about designing implementation processes that felt supportive rather than overwhelming, about measuring success through client results rather than feature complexity. But I could sense something underneath the polite professionalism that felt familiar from my previous experience with StreamlineCore's corporate culture. Ryan kept glancing at his watch, not obviously, but frequently enough that I noticed. Jessica was taking notes that looked more like artistic doodling than actual documentation of my responses. Kevin asked questions that demonstrated he'd read my resume, but hadn't understood the implications of the experience I'd described. There was a performative quality to the entire interaction that suggested they had already made their decision before I walked into the room. They were going through the motions of conducting a thorough interview, but their body language and engagement level indicated they were more interested in completing the process than in learning about my qualifications. It felt like they were interviewing me as a courtesy rather than as a serious candidate for a position they actually wanted to fill with the right person. About 30 minutes into the conversation, Ryan leaned back in his chair and adopted that patient expression I remembered so well from my time as his employee. It was the same look he'd given me when I'd proposed developing solutions for smaller businesses, the expression of someone who was about to explain why your ideas weren't quite right for the current situation. Maya, he said, using the tone that corporate executives employ when they want to deliver bad news while maintaining plausible deniability about their intentions. I have to be honest with you about something. Looking at your background and experience, you seem significantly overqualified for this position. This role is designed for someone who can grow into strategic thinking over time, not someone who's already operating at that level independently. Jessica nodded along, adding her perspective with the authority of someone who had never actually managed a strategic initiative herself. We're looking for someone hungry, someone who sees this as an opportunity to develop their analytical and planning capabilities, rather than someone who might view it as a step backward from their current level of responsibility. Your experience with small business consulting is certainly impressive, but this position requires understanding the complexity and scale of enterprise-level operations. Kevin decided this was his moment to contribute something that would be remembered after the interview was over. Have you considered exploring opportunities at smaller firms where your existing experience might be more appropriately matched? Sometimes the most fulfilling career moves come from finding environments that can fully utilize your current skill set rather than asking you to scale back to fit a predefined role that might not challenge you sufficiently. I sat there listening to them explain why my experience was simultaneously too much and not enough for a position I had essentially been performing successfully for the past 4 years. They were telling me I was overqualified for work I had been pioneering in their industry, while suggesting I didn't
understand the complexity of challenges I had been solving for clients who were achieving measurable results. The situation was almost absurd enough to be funny. Here were three people who had never successfully developed solutions for the small and medium business market, explaining to someone who had built a thriving company serving that market why she wasn't qualified to help them develop solutions for the small and medium business market. They were rejecting expertise they desperately needed because it didn't come packaged in the format they expected. But this time was different from my experience 4 years earlier. This time I wasn't a desperate ex-employee hoping for validation and a chance to prove my worth. This time I was someone who had built something successful and sustainable, someone who knew the value of what I was offering because I had demonstrated that value in the most definitive way possible. This time I had leverage. Interesting perspective, I said, keeping my voice calm and professional. Can I ask you something about StreamlineCore's approach to the small and medium business market? Because I've been following your company's development over the past few years, and it seems like you've been experiencing some challenges in that segment. Ryan's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in his professional composure. Our primary focus has always been enterprise-level clients, Maya. That's where the real value and growth opportunities exist in this industry. The small business market is notoriously price-sensitive and difficult to serve profitably. I understand that's been your traditional approach, I replied, but you've lost several mid-market accounts recently, haven't you? Companies like Austin Tech Solutions, Lone Star Marketing Group, Hill Country Manufacturing, and Riverside Digital Services. These were all clients who started small, grew with their initial marketing automation provider, and then moved to enterprise-level solutions when they were ready to scale. Now I had their complete attention. Jessica stopped pretending to take notes. Kevin looked genuinely confused about how I knew specific details about their client portfolio and retention challenges. Ryan was staring at me with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was rapidly recalculating his assumptions about this conversation and my motivations for being there. How exactly do you know about our client retention metrics? Ryan asked, his voice carrying a note of suspicion that hadn't been present earlier in the interview. That's not public information, and it's certainly not something we discuss in our marketing materials or industry presentations. Well, I said, reaching into my bag and retrieving my phone, that's where this conversation gets interesting. You see, I haven't just been freelancing and consulting for small businesses over the past 4 years. I've been building something that directly addresses the market gap you've been struggling to fill. I opened the NextBridge Innovations website on my phone and turned the screen toward them, watching their faces as they processed what they were seeing. The company logo was clean and professional, the client testimonials were genuine and specific, and the revenue figures displayed in our annual report section told a story that contradicted everything they thought they knew about my professional situation. Those companies I mentioned, I continued, letting the silence stretch just long enough to ensure I had their complete attention. Austin Tech Solutions, Lone Star Marketing Group, Hill Country Manufacturing, Riverside Digital Services. They didn't just leave StreamlineCore because they outgrew your services. They came to me, they came to NextBridge because we could offer them something you couldn't provide. Sophisticated marketing automation at price points that made sense for their business models, with implementation processes that took weeks instead of months, and user interfaces they could actually navigate without hiring technical specialists or attending lengthy training sessions. The room became so quiet I could hear the air conditioning system cycling on, could hear the distant sound of traffic from the street 15 floors below, could practically hear the mental calculations happening as they tried to reconcile the person sitting across from them with the assumptions they had made about my professional circumstances and capabilities. NextBridge Innovations, Jessica whispered, clearly recognizing the name from industry discussions or competitive intelligence reports. That company is you. You're the founder, that's correct. Founded it with the severance payment StreamlineCore provided when they decided my experience was better suited for environments that could appreciate my particular skill set. Turned out to be excellent advice, actually. Sometimes the best career guidance comes from people who don't realize they're giving it. Kevin looked like he wanted to disappear entirely, probably calculating how this conversation would be perceived by his superiors and whether his participation in dismissing the founder of a successful competitor would enhance or damage his corporate trajectory. Ryan's face had progressed through several distinct color changes, finally settling on a shade that suggested he was rapidly processing the financial and strategic implications of what I had just revealed. We had absolutely no idea, Kevin managed, his voice carrying the kind of nervous energy that people display when they realize they have made a significant miscalculation. Your resume didn't mention owning a company or generating that level of revenue. The background information we received suggested you were working as an independent consultant, not running a major operation. Of course, my resume didn't mention NextBridge's full scope, I replied, maintaining the same calm professional tone I had used throughout the interview. I was curious about whether StreamlineCore had learned anything meaningful from the market developments over the past 4 years. Whether you had recognized that dismissing qualified people for being overqualified might not represent the most effective long-term strategy, particularly when those people proceed to build solutions that directly address the market opportunities you've been unable to capitalize on successfully. I stood up from my chair, straightening my jacket and gathering the materials I had brought to what I had expected to be a routine job interview. Ryan, you told me 4 years ago that being overqualified could work against someone in corporate environments. You suggested I should find an organization that would truly appreciate my capabilities and experience. Well, I followed that advice. I found such an organization by creating it myself, and it's been working out remarkably well for everyone involved. Now, regarding this position you're attempting to fill, I continued, noting how the power dynamics in the room had shifted completely from what they had been 30 minutes earlier. You're absolutely correct about one thing. I am overqualified. But not because I possess too much experience for the responsibilities you've described. I'm overqualified because I've been successfully performing these exact functions for 4 years, while you've been trying to understand why your mid-market strategy hasn't been producing the results your projections anticipated. Ryan found his voice, though it carried a different quality than it had possessed at the beginning of our conversation. Maya, obviously we didn't have complete information about your professional achievements and current situation. Perhaps we should be discussing a different type of opportunity entirely. Something at the senior management level, possibly department head or director level. We could certainly explore executive compensation packages that would reflect your demonstrated capabilities and track record. Jessica jumped in quickly, probably recognizing that this conversation had moved far beyond the parameters of a routine hiring interview. I think we need to schedule a comprehensive follow-up meeting to discuss how your experience and insights might fit into our strategic planning initiatives at a much higher organizational level. We're talking about senior leadership roles with significant decision-making authority and equity participation options. Kevin nodded enthusiastically, despite having spent the previous hour explaining why I was inappropriate for a consulting position. With substantial signing bonuses and performance incentives to acknowledge any misunderstanding about the scope and importance of the opportunities we should be discussing, plus comprehensive benefits packages and professional development support for advanced certifications or industry leadership programs. I smiled, not the bitter expression of someone seeking revenge or validation, but something that came from a place of genuine satisfaction and clarity about my professional situation and personal worth. Here's what I need you to understand. 4 years ago, I would have been grateful for any offer you made, regardless of the terms or conditions. I would have interpreted your interest as confirmation that I belonged in your professional world, and that my capabilities had finally been recognized by people whose opinions I valued. But I don't require validation from your world anymore, I continued, enjoying the complete reversal of the conversation's direction and power structure. I built my own world, and it's functioning quite successfully according to every meaningful metric. My clients achieve measurable improvements in customer engagement, sales conversion, and business growth. My employees have opportunities for professional development and creative problem solving that many corporate environments can't provide. My company generates sustainable profits without requiring external investment or compromising our commitment to serving clients effectively. However, I am interested in exploring a different type of conversation entirely, I said, pulling out my business card and placing it deliberately in the center of the conference table where all 3 of them could see it clearly. Not about me joining StreamlineCore in any capacity, but about whether StreamlineCore might be interested in developing a strategic partnership with NextBridge that could benefit both organizations and serve clients more comprehensively. The silence that followed lasted long enough for me to observe their individual reactions to this unexpected proposition. Ryan was clearly trying to process how a routine hiring interview had transformed into a potential business development opportunity. Jessica appeared to be calculating the implications for her department and her own professional standing. Kevin looked confused but interested, probably recognizing that being involved in a significant partnership negotiation could enhance his corporate reputation. Maya, Ryan said carefully, obviously attempting to regain some control over the conversation's direction. What exactly are you proposing in terms of a partnership structure? I'm suggesting that instead of trying to hire someone to solve problems I've already solved successfully, you might consider working directly with the person who solved them, I replied, maintaining my position of strength while keeping the tone collaborative rather than confrontational. NextBridge currently serves 52 clients with a growth trajectory that has consistently exceeded our projections for 3 consecutive years. We're positioned to break $4 million in annual revenue this year, and several of our clients have expressed interest in eventually graduating to enterprise-level solutions once their businesses reach sufficient scale. The challenge these growing businesses face is that they want to work with enterprise providers who understand their user experience expectations and implementation preferences. They've become accustomed to platforms that are intuitive rather than requiring extensive training, support teams that understand their industry challenges rather than just technical specifications, and pricing structures that are transparent rather than requiring lengthy negotiations with sales departments. I walked toward the door, pausing to ensure they understood that I was concluding this meeting on my terms rather than waiting for their decision about my suitability for employment. These expectations are reshaping the enterprise market in ways that create opportunities for companies flexible enough to adapt their approaches accordingly. StreamlineCore can continue trying to convince growing businesses that complexity is inherently superior to accessibility, or you can explore how we might collaborate to serve clients more effectively throughout their entire growth trajectory. Jessica called after me, clearly recognizing that this conversation had moved far beyond anything she had prepared for or experienced in previous hiring situations. What are the next steps if we decide to explore partnership possibilities? You decide whether you want to continue losing market share to competitors you didn't realize existed, I said, turning back toward them with complete confidence in my position and my company's capabilities. Or whether you want to have a serious conversation about how we might work together to serve clients better than either of us could serve them independently. My direct office number is on the card I left on your table. You have 2 weeks to determine whether collaboration makes more strategic sense than competition. 6 months later, StreamlineCore and NextBridge signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement valued at $1.4 million annually, with performance bonuses that could increase that figure significantly, based on client satisfaction metrics and retention rates. The partnership structure was elegant in its simplicity and effectiveness. StreamlineCore would refer small and medium-sized businesses to NextBridge for initial marketing automation implementation and support. NextBridge would refer clients who had outgrown our platform's capabilities to StreamlineCore for enterprise-level solutions, but with the understanding that these clients expected certain standards for user experience and implementation support. The financial terms were favorable to both organizations, but the real value came from the strategic positioning this arrangement provided. StreamlineCore gained access to a pipeline of pre-qualified prospects who had already demonstrated their commitment to marketing automation and had realistic expectations about implementation timelines and ongoing support requirements. NextBridge gained a clear growth path for our most successful clients and validation that our approach to user experience design was valuable enough that enterprise providers were willing to adapt their processes accordingly. Ryan Mitchell remained in his position as Vice President of Strategic Development, but his responsibilities evolved to include partnership management and client transition coordination. It turned out he was actually quite effective at managing collaborative relationships when he wasn't focused on maintaining hierarchical power structures or dismissing perspectives that challenged conventional corporate thinking. Our working relationship became genuinely productive once we established clear communication protocols and mutual respect for each other's expertise. Jessica Torres became our primary liaison for joint client transitions and turned out to be remarkably capable when she was given specific objectives and measurable outcomes to achieve. She developed comprehensive processes for ensuring that clients moving from NextBridge to StreamlineCore experienced seamless service continuity and maintained the same level of satisfaction they had enjoyed with our platform. Her attention to detail and systematic approach proved invaluable for managing the complex logistics involved in these transitions. Kevin Park left StreamlineCore approximately 3 months after our interview to accept a position with a technology startup that specialized in artificial intelligence applications for customer service optimization. Before departing, he sent me a LinkedIn message expressing gratitude for our conversation and explaining that watching me negotiate from a position of strength had inspired him to pursue opportunities that would challenge him to develop similar confidence and strategic thinking capabilities. The partnership's success exceeded both organizations' initial projections.
During our first year of collaboration, client satisfaction scores improved by 37% for transitions managed through our joint process compared to StreamlineCore's traditional enterprise onboarding procedures. Client retention rates increased by 28% for businesses that had previous experience with NextBridge's user-focused approach. Most significantly, the average implementation timeline for enterprise clients with NextBridge backgrounds decreased from 14 weeks to 6 weeks, primarily because these clients had realistic expectations and previous experience with marketing automation concepts. But the real victory wasn't the financial success or the improved business metrics or even the satisfaction of watching quarterly reports demonstrate the value of approaches that had once been dismissed as insufficiently sophisticated for serious business applications. The real victory was walking into that interview, knowing I didn't need their approval, their validation, or their employment offer to confirm my professional worth or personal value. Sometimes being called overqualified is simply another way of saying that the people evaluating you aren't qualified to recognize what you're offering or understand how it could benefit their organization. The most effective response isn't trying to convince them they're wrong about your qualifications. It's demonstrating through your actions and achievements that their assessment reflects their limitations rather than yours. Today, NextBridge employs 26 people, including 4 former StreamlineCore employees who contacted us after learning about our partnership and requested opportunities to work in an environment that prioritized client success over internal politics. We're expanding our services into New Mexico and Oklahoma while maintaining our commitment to sustainable growth and employee satisfaction. I'm scheduled to present the keynote address at the Southwest Business Technology Conference next spring, discussing strategies for building scalable solutions that serve clients effectively without sacrificing accessibility or user experience quality. As for understanding what overqualified actually means, I'm still discovering new dimensions of that concept. But I'm certain it's not a limitation or a professional liability. It's simply an indication that you're in the wrong room with people who aren't ready to appreciate what you're capable of contributing. The solution isn't to diminish yourself to fit their expectations. The solution is to build your own room where your capabilities can be fully utilized and properly valued. The most satisfying part of this entire experience was realizing that success isn't about proving other people wrong or seeking revenge for past dismissals. Success is about building something meaningful that serves people effectively while creating opportunities for personal and professional growth. When you're focused on creating genuine value rather than settling scores, you discover that the best competition is simply being better at what you do, not trying to make other people worse at what they do. And sometimes the people who once dismissed your qualifications end up becoming your most valuable business partners once they understand what you've been building while they weren't paying attention. The partnership agreement signing took place on a Thursday morning in November, exactly 8 months after that surreal job interview in Conference Room C. We met in StreamlineCore's executive boardroom, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Austin and furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. The contrast wasn't lost on me. 8 months earlier, I had been sitting in their smallest conference room being told I was overqualified for a consulting position. Now I was in their most impressive space, signing documents that would fundamentally reshape how both our companies approached the market. Ryan Mitchell sat across from me at the polished conference table, flanked by StreamlineCore's legal team and senior executives who had flown in from their corporate headquarters specifically for this signing. The atmosphere was professional and cordial, but I could sense an underlying tension that went beyond typical business negotiations. This wasn't just a partnership agreement. This was StreamlineCore's acknowledgement that their approach to market development had been fundamentally flawed and that they needed to learn from someone they had previously dismissed. The terms we had negotiated were comprehensive and mutually beneficial. StreamlineCore would pay NextBridge a referral fee for each small business client we transitioned to their enterprise platform, but the amount was substantial enough to reflect the value of delivering pre-qualified prospects who already understood marketing automation concepts and had realistic expectations about implementation processes. In return, NextBridge would receive preferred partner status for StreamlineCore clients who wanted to start with simpler solutions before graduating to enterprise-level complexity. More importantly, the agreement included provisions for knowledge sharing and collaborative development that would benefit both organizations' long-term strategic positioning. StreamlineCore's development team would work with NextBridge's user experience designers to create implementation processes that maintained enterprise functionality, while incorporating the accessibility principles that had made our platform successful with smaller businesses. NextBridge would gain access to StreamlineCore's advanced technical infrastructure, allowing us to serve larger clients without compromising the simplicity that had become our competitive advantage. But the most significant aspect of the partnership was cultural rather than financial. StreamlineCore was essentially admitting that their dismissive attitude toward the small business market had cost them opportunities, and that their hiring practices had failed to recognize talent that could have prevented those losses. They were acknowledging that experience and expertise shouldn't be treated as liabilities, and that being overqualified might actually indicate superior capability rather than poor fit for organizational culture. As I signed the final documents, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 4 years earlier, I had walked out of this building carrying a cardboard box and wondering if I was fundamentally unemployable. Today I was walking out with a partnership agreement that validated every choice I had made since then, and positioned both companies for sustainable growth in an increasingly competitive market. The celebration dinner that evening was held at Rosa's Kitchen, the family-owned Mexican restaurant where I had taken several NextBridge clients over the years. I had chosen the location deliberately, partly because the food was exceptional and the atmosphere was warm and welcoming, but mostly because it represented the kind of authentic relationship-focused business that had inspired my approach to building NextBridge. Rosa's had grown from a small neighborhood restaurant to a popular destination by focusing on quality, consistency, and genuine care for their customers rather than trying to compete on price or flashy marketing. The dinner guests included key personnel from both organizations, but the conversation felt more like a gathering of colleagues who shared common goals rather than a formal corporate event. Ryan Mitchell was there, along with Jessica Torres and several other StreamlineCore employees who would be directly involved in managing the partnership. Carlos Mendoza represented NextBridge's technical team, along with 3 other employees who had been instrumental in developing our platform and client service processes. During the dinner, Ryan offered a toast that surprised me with its sincerity and self-awareness. He acknowledged that StreamlineCore had made mistakes in their market approach and hiring decisions, and he expressed genuine respect for what NextBridge had accomplished in a segment they had neglected. More personally, he apologized for the way my departure from StreamlineCore had been handled and admitted that dismissing my proposals for small business solutions had been short-sighted. The apology was meaningful, not because I needed validation from Ryan or StreamlineCore, but because it demonstrated that people and organizations could learn from their mistakes and evolve beyond the limitations that had previously constrained their thinking. The corporate world tends to discourage admission of error or acknowledgement of missed opportunities, but Ryan's willingness to be honest about past decisions suggested that this partnership had potential for genuine collaboration, rather than just contractual cooperation. Jessica Torres had also undergone a significant transformation during the months leading up to our partnership agreement. She had taken primary responsibility for developing the client transition processes that would be crucial to the partnership's success, and she had approached the challenge with a level of creativity and attention to detail that I hadn't seen during my previous experience working with her. She had interviewed dozens of businesses that had grown from small startups to mid-size operations, analyzing their experiences with different service providers and identifying the factors that contributed to successful transitions versus those that resulted in client dissatisfaction. Her research had revealed patterns that validated many of the principles underlying NextBridge's approach to client service. Businesses valued transparency in pricing and timelines, appreciated support teams that understood their industry challenges, and strongly preferred implementation processes that minimized disruption to their daily operations. They wanted to work with providers who treated them as partners in achieving growth objectives, rather than just purchasers of technical services. These insights had informed the development of new procedures at StreamlineCore that incorporated user experience principles previously considered unnecessary for enterprise-level service. Client onboarding now included educational components that helped business owners understand the capabilities they were purchasing rather than just the technical specifications. Implementation timelines were communicated clearly with regular progress updates and realistic expectations about potential challenges. Support teams received training in industry-specific business challenges rather than focusing exclusively on technical troubleshooting. The results had been immediately apparent in client satisfaction metrics and retention rates. Businesses that went through the new onboarding processes reported higher levels of confidence in their service provider and greater satisfaction with the implementation experience. More significantly, they were more likely to recommend StreamlineCore to other businesses and to purchase additional services as their needs expanded. These improvements had not gone unnoticed by StreamlineCore's executive leadership or their clients in other market segments. The enterprise clients who
represented the majority of StreamlineCore's revenue were beginning to ask why their onboarding and support experiences couldn't incorporate the same level of clarity and customer focus that was being provided to smaller clients. This created pressure for StreamlineCore to apply the lessons learned from our partnership across their entire service delivery model. The partnership's success during its first year exceeded both organizations' most optimistic projections. NextBridge referred 37 clients to StreamlineCore's enterprise services, generating over $2 million in revenue for their organization. StreamlineCore referred 23 smaller businesses to NextBridge, clients who needed more accessible solutions before they would be ready for enterprise-level complexity. The referral relationships worked in both directions, creating a comprehensive service pipeline that benefited clients at every stage of their growth trajectory. More importantly, the collaborative relationship had sparked innovation in both organizations that wouldn't have occurred independently. NextBridge's development team worked with StreamlineCore's technical infrastructure specialists to create hybrid solutions that combined enterprise functionality with small business accessibility. StreamlineCore's sales and marketing teams learned user-focused communication strategies that improved their effectiveness with all client segments, not just those referred through our partnership. The cultural exchange between our organizations had been equally valuable. Several StreamlineCore employees had requested opportunities to spend time working with NextBridge's client service team to better understand the relationship-building approaches that contributed to our high retention rates. 3 NextBridge employees had participated in advanced technical training programs at StreamlineCore, expanding their capabilities and bringing new expertise back to our development projects. By the end of our first partnership year, both organizations had evolved in ways that made us more effective at serving our respective markets while creating new opportunities for expansion and growth. NextBridge had gained access to technical resources that allowed us to serve larger clients without compromising the simplicity that had attracted smaller businesses. StreamlineCore had developed user experience capabilities that improved their competitiveness across all market segments while maintaining their technological sophistication. The partnership had also attracted attention from other organizations in the marketing automation industry. Several competitors had approached both NextBridge and StreamlineCore about similar collaborative arrangements, recognizing that the market was evolving toward more integrated service models that could serve businesses throughout their entire growth lifecycle. Industry publications had featured articles about our partnership as an example of how established companies could work with innovative smaller providers to address market gaps and improve client satisfaction. But the most meaningful validation came from our clients themselves. Businesses that had transitioned from NextBridge to StreamlineCore through our partnership process reported satisfaction levels that were significantly higher than those achieved through traditional enterprise sales processes. They appreciated the continuity of service philosophy and the seamless transfer of their existing automation strategies to more sophisticated platforms. Several had become case studies for the effectiveness of collaborative service models in meeting complex business needs. The success had also created opportunities for personal and professional growth that I hadn't anticipated when I first decided to start NextBridge. I was invited to speak at industry conferences about entrepreneurship, partnership development, and strategies for building sustainable businesses in competitive markets. These speaking opportunities led to consulting requests from other small business owners who wanted guidance in developing their own market-focused solutions. More significantly, the partnership had provided a model for how former adversaries could become collaborators when they focused on serving clients rather than protecting territorial interests. The relationship between NextBridge and StreamlineCore had evolved from competition to cooperation, demonstrating that business success didn't require defeating other organizations but could be achieved through creating more value for the people and businesses both companies served. The lessons learned from this experience extended far beyond business strategy and market development. The most important insight was that being dismissed or underestimated by others could become a source of strength rather than discouragement if you use that experience to build something meaningful rather than seeking revenge or validation. The best response to being told you're overqualified isn't to argue about the assessment but to demonstrate through your actions that their evaluation reflects their limitations rather than yours. Today, 3 years after that transformative job interview, NextBridge employs 42 people across offices in Austin, San Antonio, and Oklahoma City. Our annual revenue has grown to $7.2 million and our client retention rate remains above 95%. We've expanded our services to include advanced analytics and artificial intelligence applications while maintaining our commitment to user accessibility and straightforward implementation processes. StreamlineCore has become one of our most valued business partners, but we've also developed collaborative relationships with 6 other enterprise providers who recognize the value of working with organizations that could prepare smaller businesses for eventual transition to more complex solutions. These partnerships have created a comprehensive ecosystem of service providers that can support businesses at every stage of their growth while maintaining consistent quality and customer focus. The industry recognition has been gratifying, but the personal satisfaction comes from knowing that we've built something sustainable that serves people effectively while creating opportunities for professional growth and creative problem solving. NextBridge's employees have access to training and development resources that many larger organizations can't provide, and several have started their own businesses using skills and insights gained through their experience with our company. The partnership with StreamlineCore has evolved into something that resembles friendship more than business cooperation. Ryan Mitchell and I have developed a working relationship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to serving clients effectively. We've collaborated on several industry initiatives aimed at improving service standards and developing best practices for technology providers. He's become someone I can discuss business challenges with honestly, knowing that he'll provide thoughtful advice based on his experience and expertise. Jessica Torres has become one of my most trusted professional contacts, someone whose judgment I rely on for client transition decisions and strategic planning initiatives. She's developed expertise in partnership management that has made her valuable to both organizations and positioned her for senior leadership opportunities. Her transformation from passive participant in corporate meetings to active contributor to business strategy has been remarkable to witness and has demonstrated that people can grow significantly when given appropriate challenges and support. Even Kevin Park, despite leaving StreamlineCore for other opportunities, has maintained contact and become part of an informal network of professionals who share information about industry trends and business development opportunities. His decision to pursue more challenging roles was inspired partly by watching how I had negotiated from a position of strength during our interview, and he's built a successful career by applying similar confidence and strategic thinking to his own professional decisions. The experience has taught me that success isn't about proving other people wrong or seeking revenge for past dismissals and disappointments. Success is about building something meaningful that serves people effectively while creating opportunities for personal and professional growth. When you focus on creating genuine value rather than settling scores, you discover that former adversaries can become allies and that the best competition is simply being better at what you do rather than trying to make other people worse at what they do. The most important lesson has been understanding that being called overqualified is often just another way of saying that the people evaluating you aren't qualified to recognize what you're offering or understand how it could benefit their organization. The most effective response isn't trying to convince them they're wrong about your qualifications. It's demonstrating through your actions and achievements that their assessment reflects their limitations rather than yours. Sometimes the best career advice comes from people who don't realize they're giving it. When Ryan Mitchell suggested that I find an environment that could truly appreciate my capabilities, he was inadvertently pointing me toward the solution that would ultimately benefit both of us. The environment that could fully appreciate my capabilities was one I created myself, and it turned out to be exactly what the market needed. Looking back, I'm grateful for that job interview and the dismissal that followed. Not because I enjoyed being told I was overqualified for work I was capable of performing excellently, but because it forced me to stop seeking validation from others and start building something that reflected my own values and vision. The rejection became redirection, and the redirection led to creating something better than anything I could have achieved by trying to fit into someone else's organization. The partnership with StreamlineCore has been successful because it's based on mutual respect and shared commitment to serving clients rather than hierarchy and competition. Both organizations have benefited from learning from each other, and our clients have received better service as a result. It's a model that could be applied in many industries where collaboration could create more value than competition. As for understanding what overqualified actually means, I've concluded that it's not a limitation or professional liability. It's simply an indication that you're in the wrong room with people who aren't ready to appreciate what you're capable of contributing. The solution isn't to diminish yourself to fit their expectations. The solution is to build your own room where your capabilities can be fully utilized and properly valued. And sometimes the people who once dismissed your qualifications end up becoming your most valuable business partners once they understand what you've been building while they weren't paying attention. The best partnerships are built on mutual respect and shared objectives rather than power dynamics and hierarchical structures. The Austin Business Journal feature story arrived on my desk on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 5 years after that pivotal job interview at StreamlineCore. The headline read From Rejection to Revenue: How One Entrepreneur Built a $1 Million Partnership from a Failed Job Interview. The accompanying photograph showed me standing in NextBridge's newest office space, a renovated warehouse in East Austin that housed our expanded team of 63 employees across 3 departments. Reading the article felt surreal, not because the facts were inaccurate, but because it captured only the external markers of success without conveying the internal transformation that had made everything else possible. The journalist had focused on revenue figures, employee growth, and industry recognition, but the real story was about learning to value your own expertise enough to stop seeking validation from people who couldn't recognize its worth. The numbers were impressive, certainly. NextBridge's annual revenue had reached $12.8 million, with offices now operating in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Colorado. Our client base included over 300 businesses ranging from local startups to regional enterprises, and our retention rate had actually improved as we'd grown larger, currently sitting at 97%. The partnership with StreamlineCore had expanded into a comprehensive strategic alliance worth $4.2 million annually, with collaborative projects that had redefined industry standards for client service and user experience design. But statistics couldn't capture the cultural shift that had occurred within both organizations over the past 5 years. The partnership had evolved beyond contractual cooperation into genuine collaboration that had influenced how both companies approached innovation, client relationships, and employee development. StreamlineCore had adopted user-centered design principles throughout their entire service delivery model, while NextBridge had gained access to advanced technical capabilities that allowed us to serve enterprise-level clients without compromising the accessibility that had originally differentiated our platform. The most significant development had been the creation of the Austin Business Collaboration Institute, a nonprofit organization that StreamlineCore and NextBridge had co-founded to help other companies develop partnership models that prioritized client success over territorial competition. The institute offered workshops, consulting services, and research initiatives focused on collaborative business strategies that could benefit entire industries rather than just individual organizations. The institute had emerged from conversations between Ryan Mitchell and me about the broader implications of our partnership success. We had discovered that many businesses were struggling with similar challenges regarding market segmentation, client service, and competitive positioning, but few had access to frameworks for developing collaborative solutions that could address these challenges effectively. The traditional business education model emphasized competition and market dominance rather than cooperation and shared value creation. Our first initiative had been a quarterly conference series that brought together business leaders from different industries to discuss partnership opportunities and collaborative strategies. The conferences had attracted participants from across the Southwest, including executives from technology companies, manufacturing firms, service providers, and nonprofit organizations. The discussions had led to numerous new partnerships and collaborative projects that were creating value for participants while improving service quality for their respective client bases. The Institute had also launched a research program that documented successful partnership models and analyzed the factors that contributed to sustainable collaboration between organizations. The research had revealed patterns that challenged conventional wisdom about business relationships and competitive strategy. Companies that prioritized collaborative approaches often achieved higher client satisfaction ratings, better employee retention rates, and more sustainable long-term growth than those that focused exclusively on competitive advantage. These findings had attracted attention from business schools and academic researchers who were studying the evolution of corporate strategy in increasingly complex markets. Several universities had incorporated our partnership model into their curriculum as an example of how traditional competitive thinking could be expanded to include collaborative approaches that benefited all stakeholders. The academic recognition had led to speaking opportunities at major business conferences and universities across the country. I had delivered keynote presentations at the Harvard Business School's Entrepreneurship Conference, the Stanford Graduate School of Business Innovation Summit, and the Wharton School's Strategic Management Symposium. These presentations focused on the practical application of collaborative business strategies and the personal leadership development required to build partnerships that created genuine value rather than just contractual obligations.
The speaking opportunities had been professionally rewarding, but the most meaningful feedback had come from individual entrepreneurs and business leaders who had applied similar principles to their own situations. I regularly received messages from people who had been dismissed as overqualified or inappropriate for certain opportunities, and who had used that rejection as motivation to build their own solutions rather than continuing to seek validation from others. One message that particularly resonated came from a software engineer named Patricia Gonzalez, who had been told she was overqualified for a product management position at a Fortune 500 technology company. Instead of continuing to apply for similar positions, she had used her savings to develop a project management platform specifically designed for remote teams and creative industries. Within 18 months, her platform was being used by over 200 companies, and the Fortune 500 company that had rejected her had approached her about licensing her technology for their own remote work initiatives. Another memorable correspondence came from Marcus Thompson, a former financial analyst who had been dismissed from multiple interviews for having too much experience for entry-level positions but insufficient credentials for senior roles. He had started a consulting firm that helped small businesses develop financial planning strategies, focusing on companies that were too small for traditional corporate consulting services, but too complex for basic bookkeeping support. His firm had grown to serve over 100 clients and had become a model for financial services that prioritized accessibility and education over exclusivity and complexity. These stories reinforced the central lesson that had emerged from my own experience. Being told you're overqualified often indicates that you have capabilities that exceed the vision or needs of the people evaluating you. The most productive response isn't to diminish yourself to fit their expectations, but to find or create environments where your capabilities can be fully utilized and properly valued. The lesson had implications beyond individual career decisions. Many organizations were missing opportunities to benefit from talented people because their hiring practices and corporate cultures weren't designed to recognize or accommodate capabilities that didn't fit predetermined categories. Companies that learned to identify and utilize diverse forms of expertise often gained competitive advantages that their more traditional competitors couldn't match. NextBridge had become a case study for organizations that wanted to develop more inclusive and effective approaches to talent recognition and development. Our hiring practices prioritized demonstrated capability and cultural fit over traditional credentials and career progression patterns. Several employees had joined us after being told they were overqualified for positions at larger companies, and they had become some of our most valuable contributors to innovation and client service. The company culture had evolved to support people who wanted to build expertise across multiple areas rather than specializing in narrow functional silos. Employees were encouraged to participate in projects outside their primary responsibilities, to develop new skills through company-sponsored education programs, and to propose initiatives that could benefit clients or improve internal operations. This approach had resulted in innovations and process improvements that wouldn't have emerged from traditional departmental structures. The cultural emphasis on continuous learning and cross-functional collaboration had attracted attention from other organizations that were struggling with employee engagement and retention challenges. Several companies had hired NextBridge as consultants to help them develop more flexible and supportive workplace cultures that could better utilize their existing talent while attracting people who valued growth opportunities over traditional corporate hierarchies. The consulting work had revealed patterns that extended beyond individual companies to entire industries. Many sectors were experiencing talent shortages not because qualified people weren't available, but because their hiring and promotion practices weren't designed to recognize or develop the capabilities that were actually needed for success in evolving markets. Companies that updated their approaches to talent management often discovered that they had more qualified people available than they had previously realized. These insights had influenced the development of new programs at the Austin Business Collaboration Institute focused on organizational development and talent management strategies. The programs helped companies identify gaps between their stated values and their actual practices, particularly regarding how they evaluated and developed human resources. Many organizations discovered that their existing employees had capabilities and interests that weren't being utilized effectively, and that small changes in management approaches could significantly improve both employee satisfaction and business performance. The Institute's work had also attracted funding from the Austin Economic Development Department and the Texas Small Business Administration, which recognized that collaborative business strategies could contribute to regional economic growth and job creation. The funding had allowed us to expand our programming to include support for startup companies and small businesses that wanted to develop partnership strategies but lacked the resources for extensive consulting services. One of the most successful initiatives had been the Small Business Partnership Accelerator, a 6-month program that helped local companies identify collaboration opportunities and develop the skills needed to build effective working relationships with other businesses. The program had facilitated over 40 new partnerships in its first 2 years, ranging from joint marketing initiatives to shared resource arrangements that had allowed smaller companies to compete more effectively with larger corporations. The Accelerator program had become a model for similar initiatives in other cities, with economic development organizations from Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Oklahoma City sending representatives to Austin to study our approach and develop adapted versions for their own business communities. The program's success had demonstrated that collaborative strategies could be taught and systematized rather than relying on chance encounters or personal relationships between business leaders. The regional expansion had led to opportunities for NextBridge to develop partnerships with organizations outside Texas, including technology companies in Colorado, manufacturing firms in Oklahoma, and service providers in New Mexico. These partnerships had allowed us to serve clients across a broader geographic area, while maintaining the personalized approach that had originally differentiated our services from larger corporate providers. The geographic expansion had also provided opportunities for our employees to gain experience working with diverse business cultures and market conditions. Several team members had relocated to our satellite offices or taken on traveling positions that allowed them to work directly with clients in different regions. These experiences had contributed to professional development opportunities that many larger companies couldn't provide, and had helped NextBridge attract talented people who valued variety and challenge over traditional corporate stability. Looking ahead, the next phase of NextBridge's development would focus on international expansion and technology innovation that could extend our collaborative approach to global markets. We had received inquiries from companies in Canada, Mexico, and several European countries that were interested in partnership opportunities and technology licensing arrangements. The international interest had validated that the principles underlying our success had relevance beyond the specific market conditions and business culture of the American Southwest. The technology development initiatives would focus on artificial intelligence and machine learning applications that could enhance the user experience and accessibility principles that had made NextBridge successful with smaller businesses. The goal was to develop solutions that could make sophisticated marketing automation capabilities available to businesses worldwide, while maintaining the simplicity and affordability that had originally differentiated our approach from enterprise-focused providers. The international and technology expansion plans represented opportunities for continued growth and innovation, but they also reinforced the importance of maintaining the cultural values and collaborative principles that had made our success sustainable. Growth for its own sake wasn't meaningful if it compromised the client relationships and employee satisfaction that had created the foundation for everything else we had accomplished. The experience of building NextBridge from a rejected job applicant's frustration into a multi-million-dollar company with national recognition had provided insights that extended far beyond business strategy and entrepreneurship. The most important lesson had been learning to trust your own assessment of your capabilities rather than accepting other people's judgments about your qualifications or potential. Being told you're overqualified isn't a character flaw or professional liability. It's often an indication that you have more to offer than the people evaluating you are prepared to recognize or utilize. The most productive response is to find or create opportunities where your capabilities can be fully expressed and properly valued, rather than trying to convince others to change their assessment of what you're worth. And sometimes the people who initially dismiss your qualifications become your most valuable partners once they understand what you've been building while they weren't paying attention. The best professional relationships are built on mutual respect and shared objectives rather than hierarchical structures and competitive dynamics. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.